Hello, good friends. Good friend. Right. So my mom was born in Egypt. This is how a lot of my stories start. My grandfather was born in Syria, and he was from a very, very poor family. They had nothing. And when he was very young, his parents sent him to Cairo in Egypt to start working, like as a teenager, some really young, noble age that he began working. I just started working really this year, but he was much better than me. I miss him actually a lot today. But so he started working really young, and he actually became very successful also at a young age, and he was way ahead of the curve. And so my mom was born in around 48, and my aunt was born a bit before that. And my family's Jewish, so they had to leave Egypt pretty quick. It was not a good scene for the Jews then in Egypt or anywhere because of the war. So they had to leave. And so I grew up with the story of this immigrant story, which I thought was just like drama and romance and torture and sadness. But as many stories are, not to trivialize that. This, by the way, the next following few minutes will likely be quite offensive. And my social justice peeps, sorry I said peeps, are probably going to be really embarrassed by me. But anyways, I grew up with this idea of immigrant life being maybe a little bit different than what most immigrants experience, because the story that I loved the most and that I thought was just like tragic, glorious romance was that my grandmother had this like rock of an engagement ring, a diamond for my grandpa, because he was, you know, he like knew how to treat the ladies, so, and he could, and she's incredibly fabulous, but she couldn't, when my mom and my aunt and my parents left, they couldn't take all their jewels. They had to pretend like they were going on vacation, and so, that part's not funny, it's sad, because they were Jewish, and so they had to leave. And my grandfather actually, in fact, paid a bunch of money, or I don't know, some amount of money to, I think, have files burned so that other families who couldn't afford to leave at that point, who were Jewish and had businesses, could afford to stay a little bit longer. So it was actually this really complicated time. But what I remember was this ring, right? And years later, my family eventually settled in New York and then in Montreal. And there was this like glorious moment a year or two later, I think, when the diamond came with someone in his shaving cream can. And I was like, that is so hard that she had to get her ring, like, and it was like covered in shaving cream. And so this was like the story that I grew up with. And I remember knowing that it was hard, but I also knew that it was not hard because they had money. And there's all these stories of my mom being little on Park Avenue, and it's all very fabulous, and Christmas trees and candy apples, and my family had an okay time when they moved. So they totally did, which is really nice. So I grew up with these stories, and I remember even telling them at Hebrew school, being like, it was really hard for my family, like they couldn't take their jewelry, like at all. And like art's really important for culture, like, and for ourselves. And I remember other kids in my class whose family were from Eastern Europe, they were like, my grandparents died. And I was like, oh. That's super sad. So you don't, like, they didn't have any jewelry at all. So I was like, super sad for them, right? So I grew up a little bit more. My family is also really, with the privilege that we've had, we've also been raised with a really strong sense of social justice. And so I was actually part of my synagogue youth group, and while my friends were like smoking weed in the synagogue parking lot, which I did sometimes, I also organized Feed the Homeless programs and gave all of my allowance to people who, I could buy food. I'd essentially come downtown and my friends would buy records and I'd buy food for people who were on the street. I remember my mom giving me a talking to, like, you can't give all your money away, it's for you. It was very confusing because I lived in North York and everybody has food and money there, you know? I mean, what was hard for me growing up in North York is that my mom wouldn't let me buy diesel jeans. Do you remember when they had like that red thing? And in my high school, that's how you know if you were cool or not. So I totally didn't get to be cool. Again, that was like really hard, like, for me, because I had to buy my jeans at the Gap. That was super tough. And so, anyways, I grew up in this interesting relationship with money in which we were very blessed and had much abundance and didn't want for anything, and I had a wonderful education. I did my master's degree at the University for Peace, which is where I learned a lot about also my identity and money, because I was told when I was at UPeace that I was white, which I didn't know, and also that I was northern and privileged, which I also didn't know, because I felt like I was just equal to everyone because I was at the United Nations University for Peace. I totally got my ass kicked and I cried all the time about my identity at that point. It was also really hard for me. And so part of the thing of having privilege and having some access to wealth, it means that you sometimes, if you're me, do really stupid things with it and then become what? Born again poor. So after I came home from UPeace, I had some money, because if you're me and you have a bat mitzvah, which by the way I found really sacred and beautiful, but also I had a party, which was a Mickey Mouse thing that maybe at the Richmond Hill Country Club, which was much more modest than a lot of the other bar mitzvahs happening at the time. Just saying. Like I did my own hair and everything. Super humble. Yeah. I'm like really humble, and I was then too. I had braces. Which were hard because they hurt. Anyway, so what happened for me, I was really lucky at my bat mitzvah, is that all these people, family and friends, and they give you checks. And you get money, no diesel jeans by the way, but money, people give you money, and then your parents take it and they put it somewhere. And then when you're old enough to be persuasive enough, you get access to that money, and if you're me, you use it all to invest in a company with a friend. Which I don't regret, because I learned a lot. I totally did. But then I blew all of my bat mitzvah money. That's not necessary, because it was real. But it didn't feel real, because suddenly you have access to this money, so you're like, I'm totally gonna, I went from being, talk about the career friend, to like following the clues. I didn't look at the clues. I was just like, that's attractive. I'm gonna go from being a chaplain to being in film. So I started a film company, blew through all my money, had no savings or anything left, went to Chile to make the film, came back with $50, born again poor, again. It also means that I still get to eat filet mignon at my grandma's every Friday, but I couldn't even buy jeans at the Gap then, at all, which was super tough, because like you always need new jeans, right? And so the culmination of different things that happen when you go through different levels of perceived poverty is that your identity gets really fucked up, just like how I thought, like I still don't understand why the people at UPeace thought I was white, because I'm totally not. And how my identity is tied to money really came to a head in a special time after all the bat mitzvah money was gone. And because I'm unwed, there's no other like fancy checks coming in from the older Jews. So it was just me. So I went to open up a line of credit to try and like be born again rich. And what happened for me at the culmination of that was an old white creepy banker staring at my tits the whole time, asking me questions like, so, do you live with your boyfriend or your husband? I was like, I'm single. And he's like, do you own a condo or do you own a house? I'm like, well, I just moved in with my mom again. What kind of car do you drive? I was like, I don't have a license, I ride my bike. On and on and on, until he essentially like diminished me to dust and tits, apparently. That's all that was left of me. This old white dude looking at me. So there was something so perfect about that moment. Living in Toronto, after living in Montreal for 10 years, where it's super cool to be born again poor. The poorer you are, the more like millet you can eat in different forms, the cooler you are. But now I'm in the big city and people aren't as into millet, and they don't carry drinks around in mason jars, and they don't, dumpster dive to make family dinners and stuff. It's really classy here. And so, born again poor in Toronto means I just signed a lease about an hour ago for an apartment down the street. Thank you, it's a huge accomplishment. Born again poor equals how much rent? $1,400 in this city. So I know, I'm really poor. So that I don't have to live in a basement and read like I want to kill myself books before I go to sleep. And born again poor in this city means like curbing my $5 cappuccino habit and you know, organic cigarettes are really expensive. It's really expensive to stay super healthy in this city. Super hard. I mean, my buddy at the bank, like, all up in my tits about me having nothing. All this to say, I think there is like some integrity in having less, and there's also pride in having more. And when I thought that I was part of the 99%, looks like I'm actually part of the 1. So that's all. Morning.